Right now, somewhere in your house, there's a drawer full of stuff you don't need. Nice stuff. A watch you don't wear. Jewelry that just sits there. You keep it anyway, because on some level, having things you don't strictly need feels like proof that you're doing okay. That instinct, hoarding value beyond survival, is ancient. Not your grandparents did it ancient. Not the pharaohs did it ancient. We're talking older than farming, older than villages, older than the wheel, older than writing, by a margin so wide it's almost embarrassing. So the question is simple, and it's weirder than it sounds. 100,000 years ago, before money, before kings, before anyone had a house to put a drawer in, who actually had the most stuff? To answer that, we have to figure out what rich even meant before rich was invented. Start with the basics. 100,000 years ago, humans were living in small mobile groups, following food, carrying almost everything they owned on their backs. Wealth in that world can't mean land or gold. It has to mean something you can carry, something rare, and something other people want. And it turns out our species had already found exactly that thing. Ochre. A reddish mineral pigment, ground into powder, used for body decoration, for symbolism, maybe for ritual. Archaeologists have found deliberately shaped, deeply worked pieces of ochre at sites like Blombos Cave in South Africa, dating back around 100,000 years. Sometimes engraved with patterns that look intentional. Not decoration. Design. Here's the thing about ochre, not every cave has it. Some sites are rich with it. Others have almost none. So immediately you have inequality, not of food but of pigment, of color, of the ability to look a certain way. Think about that. The very first luxury good we can point to in the archaeological record might just be red powder. And I'd argue that's not silly at all. It means status wasn't about survival anymore. It was already about signaling. But ochre alone doesn't get you a richest person. For that you need something even more telling. Shell beads. Around the same era, roughly 75,000 to 100,000 years ago, at sites like Blombos and Skol in what's now Israel, archaeologists have found small marine shells, deliberately pierced, worn smooth from stringing, sometimes carried dozens of miles from the nearest coast. That last detail matters more than it seems. A shell found near the ocean, sure, that's just a shell. A shell found deep inland, pierced and strung. That's an object somebody wanted badly enough to carry, or trade for, across serious distance. That's the birth of value that isn't about food. Somebody, somewhere, had more of these shells than everyone else. We'll never know their name. We'll never know their face. But statistically, in any group wearing strings of rare shell beads, somebody was wearing more of them than their neighbor. Here's what makes this so important. This is the moment humans invent the idea that an object can mean something beyond what it does. A shell doesn't feed you. It doesn't cut anything, doesn't warm you at night. Its entire value is social. And the second you invent an object whose only job is to say, "Look at me," you've invented inequality that has nothing to do with hunting skill or how many kids you can feed. Fast forward. By around 30,000 years ago, the portfolio gets bigger. We start finding burials, actual graves, where one person is treated completely differently from everyone else. At a site in what's now Russia, called Sungir, archaeologists uncovered burials from roughly 34,000 years ago containing thousands of individually carved ivory beads, sewn into clothing, along with bracelets, pendants, and elaborately worked spears made of straightened mammoth tusk. Thousands of beads. Each one estimated to take real time to carve by hand. That's not a gift. That's a statement. And here's the part that should stop you for a second. Some of these lavish burials belonged to children. Kids too young to have earned that status through hunting or leadership or skill. Which tells us something huge. By this point, status wasn't just something you achieved. It could be something you were born into. That's the exact moment richest person stops being a fun trivia question and starts being the origin of an entire social structure we still live inside. Let's push forward again. Jump to around 7,000 years ago, to a site called Varna, on the Black Sea coast in modern Bulgaria. This is where things get almost unfair to compare to everything before it. In one grave at Varna, archaeologists found more worked gold than in the rest of the world combined for that entire period. Bracelets, scepters, a gold-covered ceremonial axe, gold ornaments sewn directly onto the body. One man, buried with more concentrated wealth than any human being before him in the entire archaeological record. And get this, analysis of his remains suggests he wasn't the strongest or most physically imposing person in that community. Which means by 7,000 years ago, wealth had officially and completely detached from physical dominance. You didn't need to be the best hunter anymore. You needed access to trade routes, to resources, to whatever social system decided who got the gold. So here's how the picture actually builds. It starts with a handful of red pigment that not everyone gets. It becomes a string of rare shells carried inland from the coast. It becomes thousands of hand-carved beads sewn into a child's burial clothes. And it ends, or really, it just continues, with a man in a grave wearing more gold than his entire civilization combined, buried in the ground for us to dig up 7,000 years later and go, huh, so that's how long we've been doing this. The honest answer to who was the richest person 100,000 years ago is, we don't know their name, we never will, and in a sense, it doesn't matter. What matters is that somebody was. The instinct to accumulate more than you need, and to make sure other people notice, is not a side effect of civilization. It's one of the ingredients that built civilization in the first place. So here's the full picture. 100,000 years ago, it's red pigment nobody else has. 75,000 years ago, it's shells carried from a coastline miles away. 34,000 years ago, it's thousands of carved beads buried with a child who never earned them. 7,000 years ago, it's one man wrapped in more gold than the rest of his world combined. And today, it's a drawer in your house, full of things you don't need, that you keep anyway. Same instinct. Same species. Just better packaging. Maybe that's the real takeaway. Being human has never just been about staying alive. From almost the very beginning, we've also been trying to prove, to anyone watching, that we're doing better than just alive. If you want more stories like this, the weird, quiet habits that turn out to be tens of thousands of years old, stick around, there's plenty more where this came from.